Some promises do not end when the mission is over. They simply wait for someone loyal enough to finish the walk. The autumn air settled gently across the mountains of western Montana, wrapping the endless pine forest in a quiet stillness that only arrived just before sunset. Narrow beams of golden light slipped between towering trees, painting long shadows across a forgotten patrol trail where countless footsteps had faded beneath years of fallen needles. Nathan Walker walked that familiar path one last time with steady, measured steps, his weathered hiking boots crunching softly against the forest floor. At 44 years old, the former United States Marine had long accepted that every chapter eventually reached its final page. Retirement had taught him to appreciate silence instead of chasing noise, and the quiet wilderness had become the closest thing to peace he had known in many years. Beside him walked Rex, an 8-year-old German shepherd whose black and tan coat shimmered beneath the fading sunlight. Age had touched the faithful working dog with gentle grace rather than weakness. His muzzle carried only the faintest trace of silver, but his posture remained proud, his amber eyes alert, and every movement reflected years of discipline earned through countless hours beside those who trusted him completely. They no longer wore uniforms. They no longer answered radios or followed orders shouted through the wind. Yet every evening, almost without thinking, they followed the same wooded trail together as though invisible footsteps still guided them forward. Nathan smiled quietly while adjusting the worn canvas strap across his shoulder. "One more walk, old friend," he whispered. Rex lifted his ears but did not look at him. Instead, the German shepherd continued walking with calm purpose, occasionally lowering his nose toward the earth before moving ahead once again. The forest breathed softly around them. Gentle wind stirred the pine branches overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a creek flowed patiently through smooth stones polished by decades of mountain water. The peaceful sounds blended into a silence that felt comforting rather than empty. Nathan had walked this trail hundreds of times since settling outside the small town after leaving military service. Every fallen log, every bend in the narrow path, every towering ponderosa pine had become as familiar as the rooms inside his own cabin. Nothing ever changed here. That certainty was part of the reason he kept returning. Then something unexpected happened. Without warning, Rex stopped. He did not hesitate because of wildlife. He did not bark. He simply froze where he stood, his body perfectly still, his ears leaning forward, his eyes focused deep into a section of forest where no trail continued. Nathan took several more steps before realizing the familiar sound of paws behind him had disappeared. He turned slowly. "Rex." The German shepherd remained motionless. Nathan followed the direction of the dog's gaze, but saw only rows of ancient pine trees disappearing into soft evening shadows. There were no hikers, no cabins, no movement at all. He waited patiently, expecting Rex to resume walking after a few moments. Instead, the dog quietly stepped away from the established trail and entered the untouched forest with deliberate confidence. Nathan frowned. During every year they had spent together, Rex had never wandered away without reason. Never. "Easy, boy," Nathan called gently. "That is not our trail." Rex paused only long enough to glance back. His expression held no fear, no excitement, no confusion, only quiet certainty. Then he continued deeper between the towering trees. Nathan stood alone beneath the fading light, listening to the breeze moving through the branches above. Every instinct told him to call the dog back. Every memory told him Rex had earned something far more valuable than commands. He had earned trust. Tightening the strap across his shoulder, Nathan stepped off the familiar path for the first time in years and followed the faithful German shepherd into a part of the forest where neither of them had ever seemed meant to go, unaware that the final patrol had only just begun. Nathan Walker moved carefully through the untouched forest, following the steady silhouette of Rex until the last traces of daylight faded beneath the towering pines. The German shepherd never hurried. He simply walked with quiet confidence, weaving naturally around fallen logs and weathered boulders as though he had traveled this hidden route many times before. After nearly 15 minutes, Rex stopped beside a narrow stream where crystal-clear water slipped gently over smooth stones. He lowered his head, took a slow drink, then calmly turned back toward Nathan. There was nothing unusual waiting beyond the trees. No abandoned cabin. No strange object hidden beneath the leaves. Only peaceful wilderness stretching in every direction. Nathan studied the surrounding forest for several long moments before letting out a quiet breath. "All right," he said softly. "Whatever you wanted me to see can wait until tomorrow." Rex quietly approached, and together they walked back toward the familiar trail under a sky slowly filling with stars. By the time they reached the cabin, the porch light cast a warm circle across the gravel driveway, while the scent of burning cedar drifted from the stone chimney. It felt comforting, familiar, and ordinary, exactly the kind of evening Nathan had built for himself after leaving military service. His mornings rarely changed. He woke before sunrise, brewed strong black coffee, split enough firewood for the coming week, repaired weathered fences whenever mountain storms damaged them, and spent quiet afternoons maintaining the modest cabin that overlooked endless acres of pine forest. The peaceful routine never felt empty. It felt earned. Years earlier, after retiring from the Marine Corps, Nathan had chosen the mountains because they asked nothing from him except honesty. There were no crowded streets, no endless noise, and no expectations beyond caring for the land beneath his boots. Rex fit naturally into that quiet life. Although officially retired from working service, the German Shepherd still carried himself with the discipline of a professional. Every morning before breakfast, he completed the same slow patrol around the property. He checked the tree line, paused beside the gravel driveway, watched birds lifting into the morning sky, and finally returned to the porch where he patiently waited until Nathan opened the front door. It had become their unspoken ritual, one neither of them had ever questioned. The next morning unfolded exactly the same way. Golden sunlight spilled across the valley while cool mist drifted above the meadow below the cabin. Nathan carried his coffee onto the porch just as Rex began his familiar walk around the property. He smiled, watching the German Shepherd move with measured confidence despite the years beginning to show around his muzzle. "Still keeping watch?" Nathan whispered with quiet admiration. Rex completed his usual circle before stopping unexpectedly near the old wooden gate at the edge of the driveway. Instead of returning to the porch, he remained perfectly still, staring toward the distant ridge where the hidden forest trail disappeared beyond the trees. Nathan waited. Several moments passed. The dog did not move. The expression in Rex's amber eyes was neither anxious nor restless. It was patient, as though he believed someone would eventually understand what words could never explain. Nathan finished the last sip of coffee and slowly set the mug on the porch railing. He had trusted this dog through years of difficult decisions without hesitation. There was no reason to begin doubting him now. After gathering a small backpack with water, a flashlight, and a light field jacket, Nathan walked toward the waiting German Shepherd. Rex immediately relaxed, turned without looking back, and began walking toward the distant ridge once again. This time Nathan noticed something he had overlooked the evening before. The dog was not choosing a random direction. Every few yards, Rex paused briefly to glance toward an old weathered stone marker almost hidden beneath tall grass before continuing deeper into the forest, following a route that looked less like instinct and more like the memory of a path long forgotten. The old stone marker leaned quietly beneath a blanket of moss, almost swallowed by decades of rain, snow, and forgotten seasons. Nathan brushed away a handful of damp leaves with the side of his boot, and noticed a faded engraving that time had nearly erased. Only a single number remained visible. 12. There were no names, no arrows, and no explanation. Rex waited a few yards ahead without making a sound, watching Nathan with calm patience before continuing deeper into the forest. The German Shepherd moved neither too quickly nor too slowly. Every step seemed measured, as though he were following instructions that only he could still remember. Nathan adjusted the strap of his backpack and followed. The air grew noticeably cooler beneath the thicker canopy. Tall pines filtered the morning sunlight into narrow ribbons that danced across the forest floor, while the scent of damp earth mixed with cedar and wild sage drifting through the mountain breeze. Every so often, Rex lowered his nose toward the ground, paused for only a heartbeat, then continued forward. Nathan had watched that behavior countless times during search exercises years ago. It was familiar enough to make his pulse quicken, yet different enough to leave him wondering why the dog had chosen this place after so many peaceful years. Nearly half a mile beyond the forgotten marker, the terrain began to rise. Loose stones covered the hillside, forcing Nathan to slow his pace while Rex climbed with effortless confidence. At the top of the ridge, The forest unexpectedly opened into a small clearing hidden from every visible trail below. Nature had quietly reclaimed the space. Young pine saplings surrounded weathered fence posts that barely stood above the tall grass. Wildflowers swayed gently beside the remains of what had once been a narrow wagon path. Then Nathan saw it. Resting at the edge of the clearing stood a small log cabin, almost completely concealed beneath climbing vines and overhanging branches. Its roof sagged slightly beneath years of heavy snowfall, yet the walls remained standing with quiet determination. Dust coated every window, reflecting the pale morning light like cloudy glass. No smoke rose from the chimney. No tire tracks marked the ground. Even the silence seemed older there. Nathan stopped several feet away, studying the lonely structure. "I have lived here for 7 years," he whispered to himself, "and I have never seen this place." Rex slowly approached the cabin but did not touch the door. Instead, he sat beside the weathered wooden steps, his amber eyes fixed on the entrance with remarkable composure. There was no barking, no scratching, no excitement, only quiet expectation. Nathan climbed the 3 aging steps carefully, each board groaning softly beneath his weight. He reached for the iron handle and hesitated. The metal felt cold despite the warming sun. Something about the cabin carried neither fear nor danger. It carried the unmistakable feeling that someone had once loved this place deeply before life quietly carried them elsewhere. He gently pushed the door. The old hinges answered with a long, tired creak before sunlight spilled into a room untouched for many years. Dust floated lazily through narrow beams of light. A stone fireplace rested against one wall. A wooden rocking chair stood beside a window overlooking the valley. Shelves lined with empty glass jars remained exactly where someone had left them long ago. Nothing appeared disturbed. Nothing suggested hurried departure. It simply felt as though time itself had paused. Nathan stepped inside slowly while Rex remained at the doorway, waiting with the same discipline he had shown throughout years of service. Nathan's eyes wandered across the quiet room until they settled on a sturdy cedar chest resting beneath an old American flag folded with careful respect upon its lid. Beside the chest lay a faded canvas backpack covered by a thin layer of dust, and tucked beneath one weathered strap, barely visible in the morning light, was the edge of a small metal object that caught the sun with a single bright flash. The glimmer of metal disappeared beneath another layer of dust, as Nathan knelt beside the old canvas backpack. He reached out carefully, not because he feared what he might find, but because some objects deserved respect before they were ever touched. His fingers gently lifted the weathered strap, revealing a marine dog tag resting against the faded fabric. Time had dulled its shine, but the engraved letters remained clear enough to read. Daniel Harper, United States Marine Corps. Nathan quietly repeated the name beneath his breath, searching his memory. It did not belong to anyone he had served beside, yet something about it felt strangely familiar, like hearing a forgotten melody carried back by the wind. Rex remained outside the doorway, watching silently without crossing the threshold. Nathan had always admired that discipline. Even after retirement, the German Shepherd still seemed to understand invisible boundaries better than most people ever could. Nathan slipped the dog tag into the palm of his hand before opening the cedar chest beneath the carefully folded American flag. The hinges moved slowly, releasing the faint scent of aged cedar wood mixed with old paper. Inside, everything had been arranged with remarkable care. A neatly folded marine field jacket rested beside several family photographs protected inside clear sleeves. Beneath them lay a leather journal, a small wooden keepsake box, and a stack of letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. Nothing looked abandoned. It looked preserved, as though someone believed another pair of hands would eventually return to open the chest exactly as Nathan was doing now. He picked up the top photograph first. It showed a smiling young Marine standing beside an elderly woman on the porch of what appeared to be this very cabin. The mountains in the background matched the same ridgeline Nathan had climbed only minutes earlier. On the back of the picture, written in careful handwriting, were only a few simple words. "Home will always be waiting." Nathan swallowed quietly before placing the photograph back exactly where he had found it. He untied the ribbon around the letters and noticed every envelope had already been addressed but never mailed. The handwriting remained steady from beginning to end, suggesting they had all been written over a relatively short period. He opened only the first one. The paper had yellowed with age, yet the ink remained surprisingly dark. There were no dramatic confessions, no desperate pleas, only gentle words filled with hope. Daniel wrote about missing the mountain air, about thinking of home whenever pine trees appeared in the distance, and about looking forward to drinking coffee again on the cabin porch with his younger sister. Near the bottom of the page, one sentence caused Nathan to stop reading. I promised I would never leave this place without saying goodbye the right way. Nathan slowly lowered the letter. The cabin suddenly felt even quieter than before. Sunlight drifted lazily through the dusty windows while the old rocking chair beside the fireplace moved ever so slightly as a cool breeze entered through a narrow crack in the wall. Nothing about the moment felt frightening. It felt unfinished. He carefully returned the letter to its envelope before reaching for the leather journal beneath the photographs. The worn cover opened easily, revealing pages filled with neat daily entries describing peaceful mornings, repairs around the cabin, fishing trips along nearby streams, and quiet evenings watching deer wander through the meadow below the ridge. Then the final written page appeared. The handwriting remained calm, but noticeably shorter than before. Tomorrow I begin one last assignment. If I cannot keep my promise myself, perhaps someone else will someday finish the walk for me. Nathan remained perfectly still, the words lingering in the silence around him. Outside the cabin, Rex quietly rose to his feet for the first time since they had arrived. The German Shepherd stepped away from the porch and slowly walked toward the far side of the clearing, stopping beside an old oak tree where a weathered wooden post leaned almost hidden beneath climbing ivy, and for the first time that morning, he looked directly at Nathan as though asking him to follow once again. The weathered wooden post stood quietly beneath layers of ivy, leaning slightly toward the old oak as though time itself had grown tired of holding it upright. Nathan stepped closer while Rex remained beside the tree, his tail still, his ears gently forward, waiting with remarkable patience. Carefully pulling away the vines, Nathan uncovered faded carved letters barely visible beneath decades of rain and mountain winters. Harper Ridge Preserve. The final word had almost disappeared, but enough remained for Nathan to read it aloud. He looked back toward the cabin resting peacefully beyond the clearing and suddenly understood that this place had once belonged to a family whose roots reached much deeper than forgotten property lines. Inside his backpack rested the journal, the letters, the photographs, and the marine dog tag, each piece quietly asking questions that no longer had anyone nearby to answer. By early afternoon, Nathan and Rex returned to the cabin overlooking the valley. Nathan spread every item across the old wooden kitchen table, placing each one exactly as he had found it. Steam rose gently from a fresh cup of black coffee while Rex settled beside the front window, watching the tree line with calm eyes that never seemed to miss anything. Nathan opened his laptop and began searching old county property records, local historical archives, and newspaper articles preserved by the small Montana library. Hours passed beneath the soft ticking of the wall clock. Then one record finally appeared. Harper Ridge Preserve had once belonged to the Harper family, until ownership quietly transferred decades earlier, after the death of Daniel Harper's parents. Another article mentioned that Daniel had served in the Marine Corps before leaving the area many years ago. No obituary followed. No article announcing his return ever appeared. Only silence. Nathan continued searching until one final document surfaced from a local community newsletter nearly 15 years old. It mentioned a woman named Emily Harper, Daniel's younger sister, who volunteered every Saturday at the Cedar Valley Community Library, located less than 20 miles from Nathan's cabin. He stared at the screen for several long moments before closing the laptop. The answer had been closer than he ever imagined. The following morning, sunlight stretched across rolling ranchland as Nathan drove his aging pickup truck toward the neighboring town with Rex resting quietly in the passenger seat. Small farms lined the highway while horses grazed behind weathered wooden fences beneath an endless blue Montana sky. The town itself felt timeless. A single main street held a bakery, a hardware store, a diner with polished windows, and the modest brick library standing beside rows of flowering maple trees. Nathan stepped inside, greeted immediately by the comforting scent of old books and polished oak shelves. A woman with silver hair carefully arranged returned novels behind the front desk. She moved with quiet grace, smiling warmly at every visitor who entered. Nathan approached slowly, removing his hat with respectful courtesy. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Are you Emily Harper?" The woman looked up, surprised by the question yet kind in her expression. "I am," she answered softly. Nathan carefully placed the marine dog tag onto the wooden counter between them. For one suspended heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Emily lowered her eyes toward the familiar piece of metal. Her hands trembled almost imperceptibly before she reached out with extraordinary care, touching it as though afraid it might disappear if she moved too quickly. A quiet breath escaped her lips. She closed her eyes for only a moment, then looked back at Nathan with tears gathering but never falling. "I have not seen this," she whispered, "since my brother left home." Before Nathan could answer, Rex slowly walked forward from the library entrance, stopping beside Emily without a sound. The German Shepherd gently lifted his head toward her hand, and the moment her fingers rested softly against his fur, an expression of quiet recognition crossed her face, as though an old promise she had carried for many years had finally begun finding its way home. Emily Harper invited Nathan and Rex to sit beside the tall windows overlooking the quiet town square, where golden leaves drifted lazily across empty sidewalks and church bells echoed softly through the crisp Montana afternoon. She held her brother's marine dog tag with both hands, gently rubbing the worn edges as though every small scratch carried a memory she had never allowed herself to forget. After several long moments, she smiled with quiet gratitude before speaking. "Daniel loved this valley more than anywhere else on earth," she said. "He always believed that no matter how far duty carried him, home would still be waiting." Nathan listened without interrupting. Years in the Marine Corps had taught him that silence often honored a story better than words ever could. Rex rested peacefully beside Emily's chair, occasionally lifting his eyes toward her whenever she paused, as though the old German Shepherd somehow understood that every sentence mattered. Emily walked to a nearby bookshelf and carefully removed a small wooden box polished smooth by time. Inside rested dozens of neatly folded postcards, childhood photographs, and a simple hand-drawn map of the mountain surrounding the old family cabin. She unfolded the map across the table. Nathan immediately recognized the forgotten trail, the weathered stone marker, and the clearing where the cabin still stood hidden beneath towering pines. One location, however, caught his attention. A small circle had been drawn near the eastern ridge beside 3 handwritten words. "Sunrise Overlook Bench." Emily noticed his expression and nodded gently. "That was our place," she explained. "Every birthday, every holiday, every important conversation happened there. Daniel built the bench with our father when he was 16 years old." She paused before taking a slow breath. Before he left for his final assignment, he promised that the first morning after coming home, we would watch the sunrise there together, just like we always did. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes quietly drifted toward the library window where distant mountains stretched beneath the afternoon sky. "I kept visiting that bench every year for a long time," she continued. "Eventually the trail became too difficult for me to climb alone, but I never stopped believing that promises have their own way of finding the people who make them." Nathan thought about the final journal entry resting safely inside his backpack. "If I cannot keep my promise myself, perhaps someone else will someday finish the walk for me." The words no longer sounded mysterious. They sounded deeply human. Emily carefully folded the old map before offering it to Nathan. "If you found the cabin," she said softly, "perhaps there is something else waiting along that trail." Nathan accepted the map with quiet respect. "Would you come with us tomorrow?" he asked. Emily smiled warmly, though sadness lingered gently behind her eyes. "I would like that very much." The next morning arrived beneath a sky painted with pale blue and soft streaks of silver. Nathan parked near the forgotten trailhead while Emily stepped carefully onto the familiar path she had not walked in many years. Rex immediately moved beside her rather than leading ahead, matching her slower pace with patient loyalty. The mountain breeze carried the clean scent of pine and cool earth as sunlight filtered through the towering trees. Every few yards, Emily paused to recognize an old landmark from childhood. A weathered stump where she and Daniel once shared sandwiches. A smooth creek crossing where they skipped flat stones every summer. A tall pine scarred by lightning that somehow continued growing stronger each passing year. Then, without any command, Rex quietly left the trail once again, walking toward a narrow path almost completely hidden beneath fallen leaves. And this time all 3 followed, each carrying the growing feeling that the journey was leading not toward another mystery, but toward the quiet completion of a promise that had waited patiently through the passing of many seasons. The hidden path narrowed until only a single person could walk comfortably between the towering pines, yet Rex never hesitated. He moved with the quiet confidence that had guided Nathan from the very beginning, occasionally slowing just enough for Emily to keep pace before continuing toward the eastern ridge. The forest seemed to grow gentler with every step. Sunlight filtered through branches that swayed softly in the mountain breeze, filling the air with the scent of cedar, wild grass, and cool stone warmed by the morning light. No one felt the need to speak. The silence itself had become part of the journey. After nearly 30 minutes of steady climbing, the trees slowly opened, revealing a wide overlook stretching across miles of rolling Montana valleys painted in shades of gold and evergreen. Clouds drifted lazily above distant peaks while an eagle circled high against the endless blue sky. At the edge of the overlook stood a simple wooden bench facing the sunrise, weathered by countless winters but still standing exactly where it had been. Built many years before. Emily stopped walking. Her hands slowly covered her mouth as tears quietly filled her eyes. He kept his promise, she whispered almost to herself. Nathan looked toward the old bench. Although years had softened its edges, careful craftsmanship remained visible in every joint and wooden plank. Someone had built it to last. Rex approached the bench without rushing. He rested his nose gently against one corner before quietly sitting beside it, his amber eyes watching the valley below as though he had finally reached the destination he had carried within himself all along. Emily stepped forward slowly and lowered herself onto the bench. For several moments she simply looked across the mountains where the morning sun continued rising above the distant horizon. "When we were children," she said softly, "Daniel always believed that the first light of every new day meant another chance to keep your word." Nathan remained standing nearby, allowing the mountains and the silence to carry the weight of her memories. Then Rex quietly stood once more. Instead of remaining beside the bench, he walked toward a cluster of smooth stones resting beneath a tall pine tree a few yards away. The German shepherd gently lowered his nose, sniffed once, then looked back at Nathan without making a sound. Nathan followed. Between the stones rested a small metal container protected beneath a flat piece of slate. Time had covered it with moss, but the lid remained tightly sealed. He carefully lifted it free and opened the container with steady hands. Inside lay only a few carefully preserved items. A folded American flag no larger than a handkerchief, a silver pocket compass whose needle still pointed faithfully north, and one final envelope addressed in Daniel Harper's unmistakable handwriting. For Emily. Emily's breath caught as Nathan carefully placed the envelope into her hands. She stared at her brother's familiar handwriting for several seconds before opening it with extraordinary care. The paper inside remained dry despite the passing years. She read silently while the breeze gently turned the corners of the page. A peaceful smile slowly replaced the sorrow she had carried for so long. At last she looked toward Nathan. "He wrote that if life ever delayed his return," she said quietly, "he hoped someone kind enough would one day walk this trail for him so I would never wonder whether he remembered his promise." Emily folded the letter against her heart. Nathan glanced toward Rex, who had quietly returned to the bench and settled beside it once again. Only then did Nathan finally understand. The faithful German shepherd had never been searching for something lost. He had been patiently leading them toward something waiting to be found. As the morning sunlight spread across the valley, the three of them remained together on the overlook, and for the first time in many years, the mountain no longer felt like a place that held unanswered questions. It felt like home keeping its word. News traveled quietly through Cedar Valley, carried not by headlines or loud announcements, but by grateful conversations shared across front porches, church gatherings, and the small diner where neighbors still knew one another by name. No one spoke about miracles. They simply spoke about a promise that had finally reached home. A week later, the community gathered beneath a clear Montana sky at the modest Veterans Memorial overlooking the valley. It was not a large ceremony, and no one wanted it to be. Daniel Harper had never asked for attention. He had only hoped that one day someone would tell his sister he had never forgotten the place he loved. A simple wooden table stood beside the memorial, holding the carefully folded American flag, the silver compass, the marine dog tag, and a framed photograph of Daniel standing proudly outside the family cabin many years before. Fresh wildflowers collected from the surrounding hills rested beside the picture, their colors bright against the polished wood. Nathan arrived early with Rex walking quietly at his side. The German Shepherd wore only his well-worn leather collar, free from any working harness or ceremonial decoration. Nothing about him asked for recognition. Yet nearly everyone who attended found themselves smiling gently as he passed, sensing that somehow the faithful dog had become part of a story much larger than himself. Emily greeted each neighbor with calm gratitude, no longer carrying the quiet uncertainty that had followed her through so many seasons. Her smile was different now. It was softer, steadier, shaped by peace rather than hope alone. When the gathering began, the local pastor offered only a brief prayer of thanksgiving for family, friendship, and promises that survived the passing of time. No long speeches followed. Silence became the greatest expression of respect. Nathan stepped forward carrying the folded American flag. With careful hands, he presented it to Emily, who accepted it with quiet reverence before holding it close against her heart. Their eyes met for only a moment, yet neither needed words. Everything that had remained unfinished for years had finally found its place. As the gentle breeze moved through the pine trees surrounding the memorial, Nathan slowly raised his right hand in a final Marine salute. His posture remained perfectly still, carrying the same discipline that had guided him throughout his years of service. A heartbeat later, Rex quietly stood beside him. The old German Shepherd did not understand ceremonies or traditions the way people did, but he calmly sat near the memorial stone, facing the mountains where the hidden cabin rested beyond the distant ridges. His ears lifted slightly as the wind carried the familiar scent of cedar through the valley. Emily noticed him and smiled through grateful tears. "He knows," she whispered softly. Somehow he always knew. No one questioned her words. They simply accepted the quiet truth resting in that peaceful moment. Before everyone returned home, the mayor announced that the forgotten trail leading to the old cabin and Sunrise Overlook would be restored and preserved as the Harper Promise Trail, allowing future families to walk the same path through the forest and remember that loyalty sometimes leaves footprints long after voices grow silent. As neighbors slowly drifted away beneath the warm afternoon sun, Nathan remained standing beside the memorial while Rex rested peacefully at his feet. The mountains stretched endlessly before them, unchanged by time yet somehow transformed by a single fulfilled promise. Nathan looked toward the distant ridge and smiled quietly. The journey had never been about discovering what had been lost. It had always been about returning something precious to the people who had never stopped waiting. 1 year passed with the quiet certainty that only the mountains seemed to understand. Spring flowers gave way to warm summer mornings. Summer slowly surrendered to brilliant autumn colors. And before long the first gentle snowfall settled across the familiar trails surrounding Nathan Walker's cabin. Life did not become extraordinary after that unforgettable journey. It simply became more complete. Every morning before sunrise, Nathan still brewed a fresh pot of black coffee, while soft light gradually filled the kitchen windows overlooking the valley. Rex still waited patiently by the front door, though his steps had grown slower and his muzzle carried a little more silver than the year before. Age had never taken away his dignity. If anything, it had deepened it. Their daily walks continued just as they always had, but they no longer followed only the old patrol route. Some mornings they wandered toward the restored Harper Promise Trail, where neatly placed wooden signs now welcomed visitors from nearby towns. Families walked the peaceful path together. Children laughed as they crossed the little stream. Veterans occasionally paused at the overlook, removing their hats before sitting quietly on the weathered bench that still faced the rising sun. No one hurried there. The place seemed to invite people to slow down and remember the promises that mattered most. Emily visited often. She planted wildflowers beside the cabin each spring and carefully dusted the shelves inside every few weeks, so the little home would continue welcoming anyone who happened to find it. The folded American flag, the photographs, and Daniel's journal remained safely preserved, while copies of his letters rested inside the Cedar Valley Community Library, reminding neighbors that even ordinary words could become lasting gifts when written with love. Nathan never spoke publicly about what had happened. Whenever someone thanked him, he simply smiled and looked toward Rex. "He found the trail," he would quietly say. "I only followed." Every single time, Rex lifted his ears as though recognizing his name before calmly returning his attention to the trees surrounding the path. One crisp October morning, Nathan and Rex climbed once again to Sunrise Overlook. The sky glowed with soft shades of amber and pale gold while cool mountain air carried the clean scent of pine and cedar through the valley below. They reached the old wooden bench just as the first rays of sunlight touched the distant peaks. Nathan sat down slowly, stretching his tired legs while Rex settled comfortably beside him. Neither of them moved for several peaceful minutes. There were no mysteries left to solve. No unfinished journeys waiting beyond the next ridge. Only the gentle rhythm of wind through the trees and the quiet comfort of faithful companionship. Nathan reached down and rested one hand against Rex's shoulder. The old German shepherd leaned gently into the touch without lifting his eyes from the sunrise. It was a simple gesture, almost too small for anyone else to notice, yet it carried years of trust that no words could ever fully describe. Nathan smiled as the morning light warmed both of their faces. "You always knew the way," he whispered softly. Rex responded the only way he ever had, with calm silence and unwavering presence. Somewhere below, church bells echoed faintly across the valley, while another new day began for the town they had quietly helped heal. The mountain stood unchanged, the cabin still welcomed every sunrise, and the old bench continued waiting for anyone willing to slow down long enough to remember that loyalty is not measured by how many miles we walk beside someone, but by whether we remain faithful until the very last step. And as the golden light spread across the endless Montana landscape, two old friends sat together without another mission to complete, knowing that some patrols protect a country, but the finest ones gently carry a promise all the way home.